Okay. It is possible to include President Erdogan in a solution for a current crisis. What is the role of Turkey in this crisis?
Naturally, we will start with the most recent breaking news coming out of Syria. In the aftermath of 13 years of civil war, opposition forces have declared that President Bashar Al-Assad's rule has come to an end. The ongoing crisis in Syria has given rise to a significant number of divergent points of view. In order to ensure their safety, former President Bashar al-Assad and his family have fled Syria. However, does this truly address the issue of justice that the people of Syria are trying to achieve? On the other hand, in a sudden turn of events, the First Lady of Syria has just gone through an unexpected transformation that has caused Bashar al-Assad to shed tears. What exactly is this transformation, and what was the reason that it elicited such significant feelings? Is it also possible that this will result in the complete and total end of the Assad family's rule? Find out with us by watching this video together. The sudden and unexpected change that Asma al-Assad, the First Lady of Syria, has undergone. Asma al-Assad, who was once thought of as an English rose in the desert, has undergone a dramatic transformation that has resulted in her becoming an international outcast. This transformation has garnered renewed attention from the media as a result of the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria. According to the Daily Mail, a glowing profile of Bashar al-Assad's wife that was published in Vogue in March 2011, just a few weeks before the Arab Spring erupted and was subsequently deleted, is an example of the dramatic fall in her reputation. The article, which was published as a part of the Power issue of Vogue, portrayed the individual who was born in London and had a degree in computer science as someone who was on a mission to establish a beacon of culture and secularism in the Middle East. According to what was stated in the article, the initial impression of Asma al-Assad is that of a movement, a purposeful streak through space with a flash of red souls. It suggested that she envisioned Syria's youth leading the way towards modernization by becoming active citizens. She was described as a slim, long-limbed beauty with a sharp, analytical mind who dresses with calculated simplicity. Asma and her husband, however, became symbols of the brutal crackdown on widespread protests that escalated into Syria's 13-year civil war, which resulted in over 600,000 deaths and the displacement of millions of people. This occurred shortly after the profile was published. Carter Ruck, a law firm based in London, was contracted by Asma al-Assad to provide legal representation shortly after the outbreak of the civil war. The media outlets that covered the family's affairs were subjected to legal threats. However, these efforts were not successful in protecting either her or Bashar al-Assad from being labeled international pariahs following the launch of multiple chemical attacks on civilians by the terrorist forces of the regime. Following a WikiLeaks email leak that revealed that she had spent $318,000 on luxury furniture during the first year of the war, Vogue removed the Rose in the Desert profile from its website. In the meantime, estimates from the United States placed the wealth of the Assad family at $2 billion. In the year 2020, the United States imposed sanctions on Asma al-Assad, who was considered to be one of the most notorious war profiteers in Syria. Bashar al-Assad, who was also deposed earlier this month, appeared to be overcome with emotion as a result of the sudden shift in the public image of his wife, as well as his own collapse. A defeat of this magnitude was unanticipated given that his family had ruled Syria for more than half a century and that their grip on power appeared to be unbreakable. If we are going to investigate the al-Assad family's decades-long dominance in Syria, there is one essential question that needs to be answered first. How did Asma al-Assad find herself caught up in all of this political upheaval from the beginning? Stay tuned as we reveal the specifics of the situation. An overview of Asma al-Assad's life before she became the First Lady of Hell. Asma al-Assad was a significant figure in the formation of the state and the public's perception of it. In addition to being the president's spouse, she was a lot more than that. As time went on, she became a symbol of both awe and controversy. When she was first introduced to the public, she was referred to as Syria's Lady Diana and the Rose of the Desert. Lady Macbeth and the First Lady of Hell are two of the titles that have been used to refer to her since the crimes committed by the regime became public knowledge. However, these laudatory titles have changed. Due to the fact that she was born Asma Fawaz Akras, she was brought up out of the chaos that was prevalent in the Middle East. During the time that she was growing up in Acton, a bustling neighborhood in West London, her family deftly combined traditional Syrian practices with a modern Western way of life. Her mother, Sahar Akras, worked as a diplomat at the Syrian embassy in London, and her father, Dr. Fawaz Akras, was a well-known cardiologist. She followed in her parents' footsteps. Despite the fact that they had had several close ties to Syria, the family gave the impression of being completely integrated into British society. The high aspirations of Asma's family motivated her to pursue a career in education. At Queen's College, which is located in Marylebone and is considered to be a prestigious institution, she was a student who in particular was exceptionally bright and highly motivated. King's College London awarded her with first-class honors in both French literature and computer science in 1996, demonstrating that her efforts had paid off and that she had been successful. Following the completion of her education, Asma began her career in the investment banking industry, which is a challenging industry. After beginning her professional life at Deutsche Bank, she eventually moved on to work for JP Morgan, where she made a name for herself almost immediately after arriving. It was during this time that she was known to her friends and coworkers as Emma, a name that reflected her effortless incorporation into the culture of the United Kingdom. An acquaintance of the family who had previously made a remark about her Englishness stated that she was more interested in her job and the Western way of life than she was in the politics or culture of West Asia. In her younger years, Asma was portrayed as a young woman who had a promising career in banking and appeared to be unaware of the complicated realities of her Syrian ancestry. Asma's life took an unexpected turn when her mother, Sahar, allegedly encouraged her to get back in touch with Bashar Al-Assad, a young ophthalmology student who was living in London in the late 1990s. Bashar al-Assad was attending the University of London. The two had known each other since they were young children, and they had known each other through shared family friends in Syria. Bashar had relocated to London in 1992 in order to pursue a career as an eye doctor. He was able to lead a tranquil life away from the political unrest in Syria. The work that Asma was doing in investment banking was doing very well at the time, and it seemed as though she was going to have a prosperous future. On the other hand, she couldn't help but feel drawn to this man who was reserved but ambitious. It was during family vacations in Syria that they first met, but it was in London that their relationship began to develop further. Bashar did not appear to be the kind of person who would eventually make it to the presidency at that moment. It seemed as though he was less interested in his father's political background and more interested in his dedication to the field of ophthalmology. He was quiet and focused on his studies in medicine. During this time, Asma was experiencing a significant change in her life. Her journey was profoundly altered as a result of her growing connection with Bashar, who is now a successful professional at JP at this point in time. Morgan and hopes to earn a master's degree in business administration from Harvard. Unexpectedly, she made the decision to quit her job at JP just 1 month before they were to get married in the year 2000. It's Morgan. Her co-workers were taken aback by the timing of her resignation, particularly due to the fact that it occurred just 2 months before she was scheduled to receive a sizable bonus, and shortly after she had secured a significant deal. A great number of people were taken aback when Asma and Bashar al-Assad tied the knot in December of the year 2000. However, in contrast to the majority of high-profile marriages, theirs was carried out in complete secrecy, and there were no previous public indications that they were dating. From the perspective of Syrians as well as observers from other countries, the news appeared to come out of nowhere. A great deal of speculation was sparked by this unexpected union. Others saw it as a symbolic act of modernization and reform during that time period. The two individuals, Asma, a Sunni Muslim who was brought up in a Western environment, and Bashar, an Alawite, appeared to symbolize a special connection and the hope for a Syria that is more accepting of diversity and forward thinking. Several people viewed their union as a potential growth for the nation, a sign of hopes for a more promising and optimistic future. This was the perception that many people had. They were completely unaware of the fact that Bashar al-Assad would one day become the president of Syria. Therefore, how did this come to be in the end? Stay tuned as we trace the history of how the al-Assad family ruled Syria for half a century, examining the nature of their rule and the path that ultimately led Bashar al-Assad to ascend to power, as well as the rise to power and regime of the former president Bashar al-Assad. Bashar al-Assad's father, Hafez al-Assad, seized the opportunity to take control of the country in November 1970 and orchestrated a coup plan that resulted in him being elected to the White House. Following 25 years of political upheaval, he swiftly succeeded in consolidating his power. In an effort to suppress opposition, he instituted stringent measures and began appointing members of the Alawite sect to positions of authority that were considered more important. At the same time, he put forth efforts to expand Syria's sphere of influence within the entirety of the Arab world. world. In addition to becoming a significant adversary of both the United States and Israel, he also became an increasingly vocal advocate for Palestinian issues, which ultimately resulted in the United States officially labeling Syria as a state sponsor of terrorism. In addition to this, Syria established close ties with the revolutionary Iranian government, lending support to Tehran's efforts to assist organizations such as Hamas and Hezbollah. Furthermore, Syria dispatched troops to Lebanon to participate in the civil war there. But things took an unexpected turn in 1994 when Basil, Bashar's older brother, who had been brought up to be their father's successor, passed away in a car accident. Basil had been raised to be their father's successor. In an unexpected turn of events, Bashar was thrust into the role of heir apparent, a position for which he had neither planned nor anticipated being prepared. Leaving behind the relative tranquility of his life in London and his aspirations of becoming a physician, Bashar made the decision to return to Syria. Within a span of just 3 years, his father swiftly enrolled him in a military program that was designed to expedite his advancement through the ranks. He went from being a captain to a colonel very quickly. Prior to the passing of Hafez al-Assad in June of 2000, Bashar al-Assad had already made preparations to assume the role of head of state. Through a fiercely contested election, he was able to carry on the legacy of the Assad family by winning the presidency with 97% of the vote. On the other hand, the expectations that the younger Assad would bring about a transformation in Syria turned out to be overly optimistic. The nation's strong anti-Israel and anti-American sentiments were maintained by him, positioned while simultaneously preserving the rock-solid control that his father had over the nation. On the other hand, the beginning of the Arab Spring in 2011 brought about the first significant and long-lasting challenges throughout the 40 years that Assad had been in power. Demonstrations broke out in Syria at the same time that the resistance to long-standing regimes in the Middle East became more intense. This ultimately led to the overthrow of the government of Egypt, which was led by Mubarak. Assad's response was a brutal crackdown, despite the fact that there were widespread calls for moderation from both international and regional entities. On the contrary, opposition movements gained strength rather than being able to put down the revolt. During the year 2012, Syria had already descended into a full-scale civil war. The regime of Bashar al-Assad encountered significant obstacles, despite the fact that his family maintained a firm grip on Syria. However, what factors ultimately resulted in the decline of the al-Assad family's position of ascendancy? In order to find out, stay tuned. The great defeat of former President Bashar al-Assad. The forces that opposed Assad appeared to be winning the battle in the beginning stages of the ongoing conflict. During the time that Tehran continued to support its long-standing partner, a number of other countries began to turn against Assad and acknowledge the opposition organizations as the legitimate representatives of the Syrian people. Even when information regarding the regime's use of chemical weapons became public, the United States initially resisted increasing its involvement in the conflict, despite the fact that it had been encouraged to provide direct assistance. The consequence of this was that by the year 2015, things were starting to turn in Assad's favor. With the assistance of Russia and Iran, the Syrian army began to retake land in the southern part of the country. These two countries provided vital air support and ground forces, which included Hezbollah militants from Lebanon, which is located nearby. Their advances continued in a northerly direction from that point. While this was going on, the attention of the West was shifting more and more towards the growing threat that was posed by a variety of radical Islamist groups, such as Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, which had established a presence in the eastern regions of Syria. The Assad regime was able to regain control of approximately 70% of the country by the year 2020 as a result of these changes. Assad appeared to have finally triumphed in the conflict, despite the fact that the Kurds had established an independent entity in a significant portion of the northeast, and opposition forces continued to control areas in the northwest that were located close to the border with Turkey. As a consequence of this, he started receiving reintegration into the Arab world little by little and steadily. In reality, the opposition forces were just waiting for the right moment to strike, despite the fact that it might have appeared that they were on the verge of being defeated. They made the most of the opportunity to strengthen their hold on the northwest by concentrating on recruiting additional fighters, improving their equipment, refining their training, and developing capabilities for drones. In light of the fact that Russia was becoming increasingly preoccupied with the conflict in Ukraine and that Tehran's ground support was decreasing as a result of Israel's recent war with Hezbollah in Lebanon, the rebels saw an opportunity to launch an attack. Within a short period of time, the rebels were able to seize control of important cities such as Aleppo, Homs, and Hama, with the assistance of forces that were supported by Turkey and led by the Islamist group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham (HTS). This group was formerly a branch of Al-Qaeda. After leaving these strongholds, they moved in a southwesterly direction towards Damascus, which is the capital of Syria. According to reports, Syrian President Bashar Al-Assad fled the capital city of Damascus on December 8, 2024, as opposition parties began to pour into the city. This event brought an end to a regime that had ruled Syria for more than half a century. The regime had been in power for so long. What does the future hold for Bashar al-Assad and his family? Bearing in mind that the Assad family is currently facing defeat at the hands of the rebels, let's investigate whatever might happen to them. The betrayal and escape of Bashar al-Assad and his family. While remaining in the Middle East, the streets of Damascus became eerily quiet as rebel forces advanced into Syria's capital city. Additionally, Bashar al-Assad and his family managed to escape. According to reports, President Bashar al-Assad, whose family had ruled Syria for the past half-century, had vanished. With only a few hours remaining before his covert departure to Moscow, his military commanders were left in a state of disarray. Following their successful takeover of Aleppo, Homs, and Hama, the rebel forces were making rapid progress in their advance. Bashar al-Assad, the former president of Syria, had disappeared, and his sudden departure had shattered the remnants of Syria's crumbling regime. He had been a symbol of unyielding power on multiple occasions. Nevertheless, his escape was not at all straightforward. The final days of his life were shrouded in secrecy, and his government, which was already in a state of disarray and desperation, clung to Assad's false assurances. In Damascus, on November 28th, Assad gave his commanders the assurance that Russian military assistance was on its way to the region. Despite the fact that the rebels were getting closer, he urged his forces to maintain their position. On the other hand, he was aware of the reality. The decision to intervene had already been made by Moscow. According to officials, Assad's decision to step down as head of state was a personal one, and they have not disclosed any information regarding the situation. By Saturday, December 7th, havoc had spread throughout the nation's capital. Officials from the government worked feverishly to put together a speech for Assad. It was that evening when his media advisor, Buthaina Chaban, arrived at the presidential residence to draft it. However, she was taken aback to discover that the place was eerily quiet and in complete emptiness. In the early hours of that day, his government discovered that their leader had secretly departed the country. There was a veil of secrecy surrounding his vacation spot, Moscow. Assad's exile was meticulously planned and executed by Vladimir Putin under his direction. In order to avoid being discovered, the plan involved a flight that had been arranged by Russian intelligence and had its transponder disabled. This plan was kept hidden from public scrutiny. Even Maher al-Assad, the younger brother of Assad and the commander of the elite 4th Armored Division, was not aware of the plan. Furthermore, Iyad and Ihab Makhlouf, who are Assad's cousins, were taken aback in the same way. After the sudden escape of the former president, they fled Damascus by car, but they were ambushed on their way to Lebanon to escape the situation. Ihab was killed, and Ihad was injured in the aftermath of the incident. At the presidential palace, the confusion quickly escalated into a state of panic. Assad's office manager and a large number of his aides, who had been under the impression that he was simply going back home, were left in a state of shock, unaware that they would never receive any additional orders. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the regime had completely collapsed. Soldiers turned their backs on their positions, the government gave up hope, and the rebel forces led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham were able to take control of the city. The group that was leading the charge wanted to provide solace to the residents of Damascus, who were exhausted by the war. According to what they declared, achieving victory and liberating the land is not as simple as removing chains or hoisting flags. In addition to representing the rewriting of history, they are also symbolic of the birth of a nation and the restoration of dignity. The escape of Bashar al-Assad and his family was a dramatic ordeal that was made possible by underground tunnels under the cover of darkness and with the assistance of allies and nations from other countries. Asma al-Assad, Bashar's wife, has been a constant presence by his side throughout all of these years. She has never wavered from her position. The fact that she was the mother of his 3 children was not the only thing she did. The question of what the future holds for Bashar al-Assad and his family remains unanswered despite the fact that they are currently living in exile in Moscow under the protection of asylum. Maintain your attention to learn more. Where does Bashar al-Assad and his family stand in terms of the future? Asma al-Assad, the wife of Bashar al-Assad, has been battling a severe case of leukemia for a number of years, and her health is deteriorating. Her condition is getting worse. Concerns were raised regarding her involvement with the dictatorship, as well as her ability to convince her husband to put an end to the bloodshed that was still occurring in the year 2012. In a public statement, Asma was urged to speak out against the abuse that was committed by the wives of the German German and British ambassadors to the United Nations. They asked her to take a stand and openly demand an end to the bloodshed in their video message, saying, "Take a risk and stop the murders now." They also said that they expect her to take action. In spite of their repeatedly reminding her that she could no longer conceal herself behind her husband, Asma remained silent. It became abundantly clear over time that she was in favor of the activities of the regime. In accordance with the opinions of specialists, Asma's level of contentment with the benefits and authority that came with her job increased over time. Analysts believe that the couple's unwavering commitment to their position of authority overshadowed any moral concerns they may have had regarding the transgressions committed by the regime. The Guardian's revelation in 2012 of emails that had been stolen from the private accounts of Asma and Bashar put an end to any and all doubts that had been harbored about her role. According to these emails, Asma was spending a significant amount of money on luxury items such as expensive jewelry, designer clothing, and also very expensive home decor, at a time when Syrians were suffering from famine and being forced to flee their homes. There was a striking contrast between the luxurious way of life that the Syrian people led and the suffering that they endured. The correspondence between Asma and Bashar was also evidence of their close friendship. One of the messages that she sent to her husband stated that if they are strong together, they will be able to triumph over this together. You have my love. The widespread dissemination of these private letters across Syria contributed to an increase in the level of public outrage against the government. Images that surfaced on social media at the same time showed members of Syria's elite, including those connected to the Assad family, attending extravagant parties. At the same time, ordinary Syrians were fighting to survive the civil conflict. However, since then, Asma al-Assad has resigned from her official duties in order to focus on her treatment. This decision was made after the Syrian president announced in May 2024 that she had been diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. There have been some individuals who have questioned the timeliness of these health announcements. In spite of calls for accountability for Bashar and Asma, as well as their children, Russia, which has been a longtime ally of the Syrian regime, has refused to hand them over to the International Criminal Court. As a result, Moscow has essentially become their safe haven, providing them with a safe haven that is very different from the splendor of the presidential palace in Damascus. At this time, the Assad family is still living in exile under the protection of Russia, and Syria is beginning a new chapter in its history without the Assad family. The family's residency in Moscow gives the impression of being anything but modest. In spite of the fact that they have lost their position of authority, they continue to live an extravagant lifestyle. So, what are your thoughts on the crisis that is still going on in Syria? Are you of the opinion that justice will be carried out in the end? In the comments section below, please share your thoughts with us. I am grateful that you have watched this video. We sincerely hope that you found it compelling. Always remember to give it a like and subscribe. You can get caught up on the stories of your favorite celebrities by clicking on the next video that is displayed on your screen. Let's meet up there.